Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and I have here the Cruz tablet from Velocity Micro. This is the Cruz T408. It's a tablet with an 8-inch 600 by 800 pixel display. It's a little bit larger than some of the 7-inch devices, but it's a pretty good size for, say, an ebook reader or for watching videos, and it weighs about a pound, fits more comfortably in your hand than some of the 10-inch tablets. Overall, I've been pretty impressed with the performance as I've reviewed this device. The build quality could definitely be better, and there's some apps that might run better with a higher resolution display. But mostly, if there are any quirks, they tend to be software-related quirks. You can also sort of see here, and actually as the tablet is rebooting it's a little harder to see, so we'll come back to that. The screen is inset a little bit from the screen bezel around the edges, and as I've come to use this for a while, I've noticed that some points don't necessarily seem to be quite as flush as they could be. But overall, in terms of the screen quality, I don't have a lot of complaints. The viewing angles are not very good, but it's responsive to touch, and it's not too shiny as far as glossy screens go. And really, for a $200 device, it's hard to expect much more than you get from here. You've got a glossy bezel on the front, a matte rear, doesn't really show fingerprints as much, speaker, webcam, there is no camera on the back, and there's a microphone in here, so you can use it to do voice over IP or video calls or things like that. In terms of buttons, we've got here volume buttons and a home button, or actually a power button. There are no home, back, search, or menu buttons. Instead, you use software for those. And then in terms of expansion, we've got headphone jack, USB, and a micro SD card slot. As I mentioned, at the top of the screen here you see home, back, search, and menu. Menu button looks a lot like the app launch button, which is a little confusing at first, but it doesn't take that long to get used to, really. And the overall experience is pretty good. One problem I have, though, here is that since this is an on-screen toolbar that shows up on top of other applications, there's at least one application that I found that doesn't do that as well as I would like it to, and that's the Amazon Kindle application. Comes preloaded with this device, but what you'll notice here is that at the top of the screen the toolbar hangs out for a second and then disappears, and when it disappears you notice that there's a whole line of text that it was covering up. So as you're reading books, you have to be careful, because you might accidentally cover up the text, and it's not like you can't, like you can get away with that easily not tapping the screen, because that's how you switch pages. And sometimes, if you don't tap just right, you get that toolbar on the top. Not the end of the world, but it does make using the Kindle app a little bit more annoying than it should be. Another Amazon application that you get here is the Amazon App Store. This device does not come with the Google suite of applications, including the Gmail app, Google Maps, or the Google Android Market. So you don't have easy access to the hundreds of thousands of applications that are available from the Android market. Instead, you get about 18,000 apps that are available from the Amazon App Store. It's probably the best alternative so far to the Android market, but it's not as comprehensive. If you already have an Amazon App Store account, you should see a list of applications that you've already purchased. You can download and install them. It does this even with free apps, which makes it a little bit easier to use in some ways on multiple devices than the Google Android market. But the biggest problem is the selection is not quite as great. I suspect that may change in the future. More and more developers are signing up for the App Store, Amazon App Store, all the time. And now that Amazon has its own $200 tablet coming out soon and is expected to move a large number of those tablets, I suspect that the draw for developers will get greater, which means that the Cruz T408 and other tablets that use Amazon's service will probably have access to more applications. For right now, though, I managed to install a number of apps that are not available from the App Store, and most of them seem to run perfectly well. For instance, the Dolphin web browser, not available from the App Store, but works pretty nicely here. Might take a second or two longer than some other devices to load web pages, but overall it's a pretty quick experience. And as you can see here, Adobe Flash Player is also installed, so I can click, I have it set up on demand right now. You can disable it or make it always load Flash. We've got pinch to zoom, again not quite as fast as on some higher end tablets, but for a 1 gigahertz tablet with a single core processor, works reasonably well. and I do believe Flash actually slows things down just a little bit. Let's go ahead and do another web page. Now, one thing here is, since we're running Google Android 2.3 Gingerbread, you're often by default going to get the mobile versions of websites like the New York Times website, because it basically thinks that you're using a phone. And the screen resolution is not much greater than the phone, so that's not too surprising. In terms of other applications that I managed to install, and there are ways to install apps without using the App Store. You can use the GetJar App Store, the Slide Me App Store, a number of other third-party places. Or if you have an Android smartphone, especially a rooted phone, you might be able to back up the applications using something like Titanium Backup, and then copy them and install them manually. It's a little bit of a pain in the neck, but it is a way to install some extra applications. So, for instance, the Netflix application, which is not available from Amazon, works reasonably well. Now, as you can see here, the viewing angles, if you get it just right, are pretty good. I mean, video looks pretty good, but you really do have to get it right. And so from here, colors sort of start to wash out. From here, they look okay. From this side, it's almost unwatchable. Also, this side, I guess, looks decent enough. So viewing angles are not perfect everywhere, but in some places they work pretty well. There's a skinned settings area with a sort of white background here. Some of the options are a little bit different than what you might be used to, and but there's not really any major difference there in the software from what you would get with a typical Android tablet. Games work pretty well. Although sometimes take a little while to load, although this game always takes a little while to load. In terms of the processor here, again, I ran a series of benchmarks, and it's not as fast as what you'll get with high-end devices from come on! There we go. It's not quite as fast in benchmarks as you get from some other tablets with NVIDIA Tegra dual-core processors or Qualcomm Snapdragon dual-core processors, but it's pretty similar to what you might expect from, say, the original Samsung Galaxy Tab from last year. It's an ARM Cortex-A8 processor made by Samsung. It's a 1 GHz processor, and for a $200 tablet, it offers performance that's pretty similar to what you would expect from, say, a top-of-the-line tablet or smartphone from a year or two ago. And because of the relatively slow pace of development, really almost every Android app that I tried on it worked just fine. That's actually not what I meant to load. All right. So, overall, not a bad device for $200. The lack of access to the Android market, the fact that it doesn't run Google Android 3.2 Honeycomb, not necessarily deal breakers, but I think the real problem that this guy's going to face is the fact that it is going to go up against other $200 tablets from Amazon, Lenovo, ViewSonic, and so forth. And while it's a pretty nice device for $200, which would have been amazing just a couple of months ago, at this point, there's not really that much to distinguish the Velocity Micro Cruz T408 from other tablets in its class. It's available today, whereas some of the others are not going to be available for, say, a few more weeks, which gives it a little bit of a head start. But come mid-November, I think it's going to be kind of tough for Velocity Micro to compete against Amazon, which is going to have a similar-sized device with a higher resolution display and tight integration with Amazon services. But overall, interesting little machine from Velocity Micro. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing.